it's this utopian idea.
Well, it's
right?
interesting because St. George is one of the few historic pioneer towns that is thriving that never was on a railroad.
Yeah, it's like an outpost. It legitimately is just an outpost.
The closest railroad's like an hour and a half drive today.
Right.
It was a couple days probably by horse. And so we have a population that is innovative, creative. They know how to do exactly what you're talking about. We're in a new world now with technology, innovation, AI.
Hey everyone, the St. George election this year is incredibly important. Go to votestg.com to see who's running and what they stand for, or visit us at our voter booth at Digby's Market, Red Rock Bicycles, or down in the park.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to the 435 podcast. We just finished up a great conversation, me and Rick Akin. He is a man of many talents. So this conversation went all over the place. We talked about the government's role in innovation and the future of St. George. We talked the Utah Tech University and Atwood Innovation Plaza. We talked mental health. We talked about geology a little bit. We talked about transportation. We talked all kinds of stuff. We hope you get a lot of value out of this, but we want to take this time to look down the future. How are we going to envision Southern Utah? And coming from a local boy that's been all over the place and come back to Southern Utah with lots of experience to grow on it, we're excited. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you're a college student and you're interested in the mental health conversation that we had, make sure you go to trula.com and find out more information about that. Check out Atwood Innovation Plaza for the makerspace and business startups, but go to votestg.com. That's why we're doing this podcast right now. That's our focus, is to make sure that we get out the vote in Southern Utah. Votestg.com, and you can find interviews with the political candidates that are running right now. We have a big election coming up, so make sure you tune into that. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Hit subscribe, hit the notifications, and we'll see you out there, guys.
We see this at like the start of emerging ecosystems, like startup ecosystems, where you tend to like build companies with your besties, And what's not surprising is you tend to gravitate towards people who have similar. You see and interpret data in a similar way, and so you vibe really well, right? But it may not be the healthy tension that you actually need to have, the creative insights and creative construct and the healthy disagreement to really understand like what product you should be building for what customer and how to go to market. And so you need that kind of healthy tension to do that. And more advanced ecosystems are pretty aware of that. So you look in Boston and San Francisco, it's very much like, okay, we need a hustler. We need somebody who's going to also be a tech nerd and dive into the product. And someone's going to be maybe focus on customers and sales and out, on the streets all the time.
Yeah.
And so I think I saw this, it's interesting in St. George because St. George has always been a very innovative space. We've had to be. I mean, it's climate-wise, it's really challenging to live here. It's really hot. It's always been.
Oh my gosh! And can you imagine before like air conditioning, like all the other, like just the environmental stuff that they have no control over.
And there's and it's not like there's a golden platter of you can just pick things and choose. You have to create your own experience and success and fulfillment here.
Yeah.
And it's always been that way. And I think that's what's created a resilient people here. And so there's a lot of creative innovation and ideas that I saw here. It's a huge gift. I mean, I grew up here. Family were part of the first two settler groups in 1861 and 1868, I believe was the second group that came down. And my family was in both of those. So we've had this long history of people coming here, creating beauty out of really difficult situations, building a resilient people, really innovative. Now, as our world has advanced and grown and become really innovative with technology, and we're a global society now, innovating within your own ecosystem and solving a problem just for your own ecosystem still works. But there's also opportunities to actually innovate and solve problems for people outside of your ecosystem that you might discover the problem in your ecosystem and or in your community.
What's an example of that?
So an example would be like Hunter Mans. He was a 14-year-old kid out of Vegas and was paranoid about water. He's like, adults aren't solving our water issue. And
as rightfully so.
Yeah.
What a smart 14-year-old kid.
Yeah. And so instead of reading comic books, he's reading desalination books. And by the time I met him at 18, he had come up with a really amazing invention around desalination that dramatically increases the output of potable water without additional costs. And it's very unique. And that's not a problem just seen in our ecosystem, in our community in Vegas and Southern Utah. It's a problem everywhere, right? And so we have countries interested. Israel's been out to St. George, Saudi Arabia. We have, they're doing some work with the Navajo Nation and cleaning up their water aquifer systems, pilots now with some of the largest desalination plants in the world. And so he's 22 now, I believe, 22, 23. And so it's been a long road, but amazing that his insight into a problem to solve started in his community, but it's a bigger problem. And that wouldn't be a viable business to start just to solve problems in your own community, because it requires so much investment that you have to have global customers. Yeah. And so this is what we're seeing in St. George, right? So his team is diverse, and we made sure of that from day one, making sure that they had different expertise and skill sets on the at the table.
So let's back up a little bit, because we kind of rolled right into that. But let's tell everybody who you are.
Oh yeah, Rick Akin, local boy. I grew up here.
Local boy.
Yeah. Family's been here 150 something years.
Nice.
Yeah.
Where'd you go to high school?
Dixie High School.
Dixie Flyer.
Yeah, Dixie Flyer. I went to Dixie Junior College when it was a 2-year college. Then went and got my my bachelor's degree at BYU, and then went to Harvard for my MBA.
Okay, Harvard for your MBA, and then after that, you jumped around to a couple businesses.
Yeah, I mean, I was, especially when you're. I mean, I saw things changing and moving all the time in like the workforce. So I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do. So I actually did an internship with the U.S. Embassy in Moscow on legal reform. I at BYU did an accounting degree, and I worked in accounting, got my CPA in Southern California, did that for 3 years. And then I decided to go to business school. And then after that, I was definitely always interested in entrepreneurship, because my dad, my brothers, I had some other family members that were in entrepreneurship. And then when I was but I always kind of felt like a late bloomer, like I feel like I'm pretty.
That's so funny. You went to Harvard. But you're a late bloomer.
Well, I feel like I'm slow at learning things, or I'm like at least aware of the things that I don't know, and so I'm very conscientious and cautious about just making sure like I really understand things, and so I don't. Anyway, I take my time on that kind of stuff. And so
I think it goes back to our ADD thing. It's like,
I think it might be, yeah.
The slow learning thing. I remember my whole life growing up thinking, like, people would be always, you'd start writing your resume, and I'd hear this all the time. It's like, oh, you're a quick learner, or, things like that. And I never felt like a quick learner. Right. I felt like, I'm like, why does this take me so long to understand this? Why do I have to listen to this over and over for me to finally get it?
And it's probably because everything was interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like every word of it.
Everything. And so you're always like running down new, interesting ideas and trails and stuff like that. And so business school at least provided me some healthy frameworks to make decisions and how to evaluate things objectively. And one of my teachers and mentors there, I wanted to go into startups, but this was in 2008 and the world kind of crashed. And I was actually thinking about going into real estate, but then the market crashed. So I was thinking maybe I'll go into startups, and then
the funny thing is that's when you should have gone into real estate.
Probably, yeah.
That was like the right time.
That's probably right. Yeah.
Like looking back, you're like, wait, everybody was getting out. That's the when.
But nobody was
in,
hiring, right? Like I didn't.
That's true.
I didn't. I mean, I applied for jobs, and it's really difficult. And a professor said, go, if you want to be an entrepreneur, go into a corporate environment, learn a customer really well, and then you go start a company around a problem that you've identified that the corporation's not doing. And
that's something I don't think when you hear all of I call it hustle porn. It seems like when you hear all these talking heads talking about entrepreneurship, it's not go learn a customer. It's not go learn what does a successful business system look like? Because as an entrepreneur, what you're doing is you're coming up with an idea and then you're going to create a repeatable system that then you can then package up and you sell to somebody else. But you have to have a customer too. It's like understanding these dynamics. It seems like even getting into real estate, there's no focus on who is the customer, right? Even just as simple as just like a real estate business, there's never really a whole lot of training. I didn't get any training, period, whatsoever, until I came to Keller Williams. But even within Keller Williams, we don't talk about the customer enough. Yeah. And you saying that, the light bulb goes off. Is like, man, we don't do enough time, especially early on, understanding the customer. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
I mean, I'm glad you brought that up because what's I think a misnomer in entrepreneurship is I have to come up with a really good idea and have tenacity and not listen to anything and just push forward and bulldoze and make it happen. And that's not necessarily true. I mean, you absolutely need tenacity. You have to live in kind of two worlds. You have to have your ears wide open. You need to be listening and making sure that you have the right product market fit, but your idea doesn't come from you unless you are the customer. Yeah. The idea is being aware of a customer that you may not even understand, but I think that's actually the beautiful thing. So there's a training, and it's called human-centric design thinking, and the root of that is empathy. And the definition I like of empathy the most is knowing I'll never understand, but believing it's worth my time to try. Because the lens that I have on the world is only the lens I see the world, and nobody else sees that, even my siblings. And understanding that and then being able to say that's a customer segment or a person that I care about. And so I'm going to be curious and asking questions constantly and learning. And this is what we see. So there's two types of successful entrepreneurs generally. I mean, there's all different types, but we tend to see the highest success rates coming from two sources. One is someone who worked in corporate environment, got really intimate with the customer, knew them, understood their kind of ecosystem, their life, like how they operated, identified a problem that corporation's not going to solve, and then they end up leaving and starting that company. Those tend to be like executives. So they worked in an industry or customer segment area for 20, 30 years.
And quick detour there, because I think this is something that I think is really important and unique about what they're trying to do, meaning a lot of people looking at St. George is saying, hey, we need to create jobs, right? We need to create jobs for the 21st century. We need to create jobs that aren't just blue collar construction jobs, because that's historically what's been here. But we need jobs that are long reaching. And in technology companies, you get this exact thing, right? Because these companies solve problems at a macro level that have scale, and a lot of times they don't necessarily want to take the time to segment off, because it creates this opportunity, and the people working within that organization is like, oh, well, there's this problem over here that we just figured out. And then this tech company creates this other little tech company that grows into a tech company, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. So we don't need companies to necessarily be these conglomerates anymore. Like there used to be like 50, 60 years ago. Because
I think monopolies are we have more monopolies now than we've ever had. And a lot of them are in the tech field. However, I think that's because this is regulation. We could go off on a whole thing. I just listened to this thing with Bill Gurley talking about regulation. Oh my gosh, it was so good. But to your point being, I don't think we need them either, right?
We don't need them because we have public markets that you can create your own conglomerate, so to speak, by investing in lots of different companies. Now, some companies like Amazon, what they've centered their innovation around is a customer segment, not a product.
True. It's a platform.
Yeah.
Right?
So there's different ways to create to focus your company. You can focus on a core competency, which is probably what most companies do. Say our expertise is, X, Y, and Z. So even if we see a new problem that same customer segment that we have is experiencing, but if it's outside of our core competency, let's say our core competency is
use Amazon as the examples. Their core competency to start was books. They're like, we need to give like a digital online library, right? We kind of wanted to say, hey, we see a problem that housing the books, it's very expensive, so like a brick and mortar doesn't have scale.
But they shifted to their core competency is understanding a customer.
Yeah, but they started there.
That's right.
And then they started saying, okay, well, if this was the core competency, then they start understanding, okay, the customer is coming here, why?
Yeah.
And then they said, oh, okay, now this problem similarly be solved with any product?
Exactly. Yep. And so that's typically what we see. This is why executives at corporations can be really good entrepreneurs, because they're also they're more objective about how they take risks. They'll choose, which risks they want to take, and so they tend to be really good decision makers and not less emotional. Now, there is also the other side of the equation, and it's a different type of profile for a successful entrepreneur. And these are ones that have been in a startup. They've seen the experience, because doing a startup is actually difficult. It's not just building a product and going to market or building a product and hoping people show up. You have to raise funding. You have to build a team. You have to make sure you have the right types of skill sets. So it's very complex. And so probably the most successful types of entrepreneurs tend to be those who've been part of a previous startup, top 10 employee or first 10 employees. And then they see that, they go through all the life cycle of a startup. They understand the initial excitement and then the trough of how difficult it is to actually do it, go to market.
The dip.
Yeah. And so this is, when you look at Salt Lake, it's interesting because a lot of the startups that we see now, it's like the fourth generation from Micron and Novell were perfect. There is a lot of the executives there started companies, then those executives left and started companies. And so this is what you typically see in emerging startup ecosystems. Now, we haven't really had that in St. George from the type of startups that have global customers, can raise outside capital.
But we're kind of on the verge.
We're starting to see it. Yeah, SkyWest was one of the early ones that did that. But when we're in a small community, now we're not a small community anymore, but previously, a lot of those startups that may have started here, the incentive is to move somewhere else because you have better talent to pull from.
Yeah.
If it's especially if it's like
labor intensive.
Yeah, or like a specific skill set, like software engineering, where that's starting to build here. And we're starting to see more and more like expertise that you can hire from, but it's actually talent's an important part of building a company.
Yeah, I've heard this a bunch, is that, our number one resource is the students that we educated and then exported out.
That's right.
It's like, the college has been around for, I think it's like 80 years now, right? Dixie College. And then, so,
but granted, it was a junior college, right? So
true.
Still to today, I think.
But even then, we were an agricultural community with this junior college resource of like, hey, we're educating kids, and then they're not staying here to start businesses; they're leaving because we didn't have a complex enough, robust enough economy to help keep them here.
Yeah, it's definitely like a chicken and egg thing a little bit to some degree, because a junior college, you're leaving with an associate's degree, and it's a generalist degree, basically.
Fair enough.
And even still today, I think the university graduates, about 70 to 80% are still kind of associate generalist kind of degrees.
Hey, so, Rick, I have a question for you kind of along those lines. I mean, you're from here, born and raised. Do you see St. George shifting from kind of a quiet little retirement community to more of a destination / business opportunity?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. Like so back in 2000, when there was that first market crash, it hit St. George really, really hard.
So you're talking, are you talking 2008,
2000? No, I'm talking about 2000 with the tech bubble. It really hit St. George. And that was
why do you think that was?
That was because it was a second home market. And so people were like offloading their second homes and that kind of stuff.
Second homes, okay.
And then we're seeing, it seems like, now I haven't seen the data on this necessarily, but it seems different. Like I came started getting involved back in St. George in 2019 from the university, Lindsay Atwood, Kyle Wells. They wanted to do Innovation Plaza. And I came back in 2019 and they had the Cairn Symposium. And this was about kind of these types of startups. And it blew my mind what was already here. And it's because people loved being here. The outdoor lifestyle, quality of life, St. George is an incredible place. And to see the people that were here just working from home, some of the Mars missions are run here. I saw, Lincoln Nadal with the genomics work from Stanford, Intermountain Healthcare Precision Genomics, and Printer Logic Vision, Zonos, all these like companies that were here, and I was
RAM. I mean, even
RAM,
think of like
Intergalactic, and what they've created. And so that is absolutely shifted because people want to live here, and now we live in a more remote. I think COVID taught people how to be more remote, and so one side we're seeing talent moving here and working remotely, or they're living here and flying to work in other places during the week. And now that's a good start because then you have talent here that then could come together, coalesce, and create startups, which is what we're starting to see. Now, we still have challenges. There's still talent issues. One of the big talent issues that we have right now with startups is CEO talent, I would say. We have really good ideas and product and innovation, and it blows my mind, actually, what's happening here. Now navigating, raising funding, having the relationships, that access to that capital, navigating the different life cycles of a startup, that's a totally different story because it's so easy to get so focused on your investor that you lose your customer, you lose your product. And so, and investors will, they don't want that, but they'll also tell you to do everything and you feel like you have to do everything. So a good CEO is going to be like, okay, these are the things that we're going to do, and I'm going to pick my investors that are aligned with our mission, our objective. And so at least when I first started coming down here, a lot of the early startups that I was involved in and kind of helped evaluate and even be part of the launch is sort of like, okay, let's recruit talent, let's find some of the leadership talent and also recruit locally too, as best we can.
So let's go back. So you came here, Innovation Plaza, that's the reason you came back? Maybe help me understand, where were you last before you moved here?
Yep.
And then, what was that impetus to say, hey, I'm going to come back to the hometown type thing?
Yeah. I mean, it's, Lindsay Atwood was a dear mentor of mine, and he passed away in 2019. But when I met him, and I was telling him about some of the innovation frameworks and startups I was doing in the corporate environment. So I was working in a corporate environment, launching startups, being part of that, solving problems.
I'm going to stop real quick because I want to say, give us a quick background on Atwood if they don't know.
So Atwood Innovation Plaza,
or just Lindsay Atwood.
Oh, Lindsay Atwood. Yeah, he was a successful entrepreneur. He had 7 out of 7 successes. I've never met an entrepreneur like that because he was so ruthless at understanding problems, solving it.
Any names that people would know?
True Hearing, True Vision. Those are kind of the 2 biggest ones.
Okay.
He's also the reason why you can buy frozen chicken nuggets in a grocery store.
Oh, thank you, Lindsay Atwood.
Yeah, because
my kids wouldn't even eat.
Well, Tyson Foods was they created chicken nuggets for McDonald's, and McDonald's had strict rules that they had to be perfectly round, and so anything that wasn't perfectly round, they were throwing away, and it was bankrupting Tyson Foods. And Lindsay's like, well, he had a grocery store or meat company or something at the time, and he's like, well, he was talking to Tyson Foods, just send me a cup, some, and I'll see what I can do. So he packaged them and put them in grocery stores, and they flew off the shelves. And Dan Tyson even drove one of the trucks out there just to meet Lindsay Atwood. Could be like, you saved my company.
That's a cool story.
Because McDonald's was rejecting about 50% of the chicken nuggets, and
McDonald's.
Yeah, and
kids hopped up on sugar and throwing away chicken. So perfectly good chicken,
right? And it wasn't an easy lifestyle for Lindsay. I mean, it was up and down.
A grind.
It was entrepreneurship, right?
I totally took you off track, but
he was on the board of trustees at Dixie State University at the time, or Utah Tech now, and he's like, we have this building, we want to do innovation. He had really good instincts about startups, but didn't have a framework of how to educate, teach, train people how to do that. And I spent my career in corporate doing that, actually training, launching companies, frameworks, how to evaluate risks to startups, and knowing which ones you want to invest in and build. And I had done some startups myself as well. And so he's like, well, come down. So I started just came down initially on a consulting contract with the university, 9 months to kind of help what the programming should look like, what startup incubators we should have, or what type we should have there. Launched that, trained, hired a couple people, and helped local entrepreneurs, whether they're part of the university or not. They could be community members, because Innovation Plaza is basically available for everybody here. It's a maker space, it's co-working space.
A lot of people don't know about
programming.
It still. They still don't know about it.
You want to start a company, the team there is amazing to help you kind of think about that. They have a federal patent office run by Wayne Provost, who's brilliant, started the insulin pump, the cereal box top.
Insulin pump. That touched. I didn't realize
he's an incredible inventor. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And so we just have this kind of talent in St. George because St. George is such a great place to live. It attracts people like this that just want to give back. And he was basically just like giving his time to help local people. And we
had this massive wealth. And I kind of had this realization. I think it was about a year ago, where I was like, we have this really, and this came out of this idea. I said, we're an island in the desert. We have, we're basically 4 hours from Salt Lake. We're, hour and a half, depending on how fast you drive from Vegas, but it's just literally desolate land between those two big, metropolitan areas. So we have this unique situation where economically we're isolated, right?
Right.
So how do we create a sustainable economy where we're not reliant upon state funding, whether it's governmental funding or large organizational funding that makes us necessarily have to, bend the knee, right? I thought we have so many brilliant people here. Can we create our own community, our own centralized, sustainable community that doesn't necessarily have to rely on any of these other outside things? Like, how can we? How can we? It's this utopian idea.
Well, it's
right?
interesting because St. George is one of the few historic pioneer towns that is thriving that never was on a railroad.
Yeah, it's like an outpost. It legitimately is just an outpost.
The closest railroad's like an hour and a half drive today.
Right.
It was a couple days probably by horse. And so we have a population that is innovative, creative. They know how to do exactly what you're talking about. We're in a new world now with technology, innovation, AI.
But just the pure talent, like the people, like these, a lot of them are truthfully like retirees where they're like, hey, I was brilliant somewhere else and then I came here. But it's like, how do we harness all of that brilliant knowledge? And this is where I thought Innovation Plaza really has like this opportunity to say, hey, if you're retired and bored, but did something brilliant in your life, like come teach this new generation.
I mean, there is an amazing group of mentors. There's the mentor group as part of Innovation Plaza that Wayne Provost, Jeff Stewart, has kind of been part of like creating that. And so it's pulling in this amazing talent that's retired. Now, they're not going to work in a startup,
right?
But they're going to provide guidance, mentorship, investments, getting fundings, the easy part of a startup. I mean, it's still hard. There's no question about it. But if you have a good product and a good customer, it's like you can get the funding.
Yeah.
And it kind of depends on the environment as well. But we have a lot of the resources.
When you mean environment, you mean like timing or?
Yeah, the timing. So like right now with interest rates as high as they are, there's less risk investors can place outside of a startup. So they can make pretty decent returns.
On a T-bill.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's a little bit more challenging to get investments right now. But still, if you have a good product, you see customers putting money, buying things, recurring revenue, you can navigate those with the right talent.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I believe in St. George just because we have this history of evolving, being innovative, being creative, kind of exactly what you're talking about. The challenge that we'll have is because it's such an attractive retirement destination and those retirees and a vacation destination, that's always going to prop up housing prices. Plus we have natural constraints, water, our geography. And so that's also going to put
land restraints, right? The federal government owns a bunch of our land, right? There's like only so much we can expand. And
that's exactly right. And so we'll always have increasing property values, it seems like. I'm not an economist, so I can't really totally speak to that. So we do have to create jobs that allow, well, there's two things. One, create a more affordable, attainable housing options. The second is increasing our wage. And we do that through companies like this that have customers outside of our ecosystem. They're global customers. We have investments from outside of our ecosystem, but you can employ people here. So you're selling a product to a customer in New York City, but you're living here in St. George. Those are the types of scalable startups we need to start seeing, and that's happening now. And so that's what I'm super stoked about right now is we do have a handful of really amazing startups, growing startups that are training also another generation of entrepreneurs to go start companies, to be the CEOs of those types of companies.
Yeah.
Some people are naturally born with a talent, like Lindsay Atwood, I would say. He was one like that. My dad was that way too.
Yeah.
My brother Joe, he just had good instincts. Myself, I had to go to school to learn how to do this.
Yeah, me
it
too.
Did not come natural.
Well, and so thinking about where we're at now, if we were to take this down the road, what are some other things? Because I think there's a big conversation about what can the local government do, right, to solve affordable housing, right? Because I think this has been a talking point with city council members, but even at the state level and things like that is, they're trying to almost regulate their way into affordable housing. But I take the point of what you just made too, is that we need to increase revenue. We need to lead with revenues. Like how do we get people more money to be able to afford and stay here, right? Not necessarily. And this is tough too, because even Jeff and I put the voter booth up at the Dixie High School's game on Friday, and I had a couple of guys come and they were talking to me, and they kept talking about the common man and how the government isn't doing anything to support the common man, and I don't disagree that that feeling is valid. Like there's valid feelings to that, is feeling like, well, if I don't have this, technical skill set, I didn't go to Harvard, or I didn't, I'm not tech savvy, where does that leave me? And it's an unfortunate part of time and societies and how they grow. But at the same token, we can't, it doesn't seem to me like there's a place for, if you're not going to increase your skill set and want to learn and grow, there's going to be places for you to to continue to be supported. So there at some level there's this support for a labor force, an unskilled labor force, right? And creating environments for that. But at the same time, a focus on how do we continue to drive, education and build an environment, a business environment. Where do you see, what could we be doing differently than what we're doing right now to help encourage that?
Yeah, that it's a good point. We need a diverse economy. So we need all of that. And so we need technical skills, we need, apprenticeships, we need all those types of things, because that's not going away. In fact, even with AI, that's putting more of a challenge on knowledge workers than it is,
unskilled, low skill worker.
Yeah, in terms of like they're highly skilled in their professions. Yeah. And we need all that. So we need a diverse economy. We need to diversify for sure. That allows us to be sustainable through market changes. We also, I think you're bringing up a really good point. It's like we need to be able to trust our skill sets and the tool set that we have to adjust and evolve as the world economy and our society evolves. We need to be able to trust our ability to do that. If we just put our head in the sand and say, I'm only going to keep this one specific skill set, people will out innovate you, because the innovation's moving faster and faster. And so I think that's kind of like my general foundation, how I think about it. Now, there's no question that government, local economy or local government has a huge role to play. It doesn't mean that it's kind of they're going to drive everything and push it, but they can set the table, and government has a unique perspective of having a longer term view They can.
And that's kind of their role should be to kind of look long, right?
Is not very good at the long-term view.
Yeah, because they're trying to make revenue, right?
Yeah,
they're trying to hit a
good
profit
at the near
margin.
term. And so government can play a role and say, okay, these are strategic areas that we want to invest in. So I think a good example is like Kansas City. It took them about a decade, but they wanted to create a startup ecosystem, and now it's this thriving startup ecosystem. And they did a few things. The government actually created an investment fund through a bond to invest in early startups. That might be a little extreme for us here, but there was a lot of things they did to actually build up a more advanced kind of startup technology educated ecosystem.
Hey Rick, why? I mean, you mentioned it might be a little bit extreme for here. What do you mean by that? Like what?
It seems like our community is fiscal responsibility is really important to us, and being fiscally conservative, and doing a community bond to invest in a risky startup is risky. There's no question about it. And we might be a little bit more prudent on where we want to place our tax dollars. We could do it that way, but maybe we might be more open to the idea of investing in high-speed internet, fiber optic, that infrastructure that benefits everybody, or quality of life things, like still investing in our recreation, park services, that kind of stuff. That attracts really good talent. Building maybe our downtown environment that's focused around food, restaurants, farm-to-table experiences, that attracts talent here. So we might find ourselves in our community more interested in investing in some of those things that have a broader impact that's not just focused on the startup ecosystem.
Yeah.
And I think that's important because we can get investment. It doesn't necessarily have to come from the state, but it can. The state there, if you run it properly, you can actually make a huge return.
Yeah.
In the state of Utah, they have a Utah Innovation Fund now that they just launched. I can't remember how big, 15, 20 million, to invest in startups that are associated with the public universities.
Well, and so like this is where you start to see two globes like crashing into each other, right? Because I take a perspective of I get the perspective that a government is like a business, right? In a sense, because it has shareholders, it has expectations that the citizens are, I'm hiring these people to do this job, and there's some clear expectations, right? So there's some simplicity in saying the government is like a business, and at the same time, the role of the government isn't necessarily to make a profit, right? Where a business is in it to make a profit for its investors and shareholders and or to solve a problem, right? There's like a specific, customer that they're trying to service, right? And then they know whether it's at a large margin or a small margin, that it's something that they can stay consistent, throughout a period of time. In government, it's a role of protecting, right? There's this utility of saying, okay, we need to mitigate risk. Like in my mind, I think of government as like, hey, this is like our safety net. This is the thing that we're supposed to, it's a tried and true thing that we can have a reliance on. We could expect this thing to always happen, right? It doesn't necessarily always have to be innovating, but it does have to show up. My water needs to turn on. The electricity's got to go on. The roads can't have holes in them, right? Like, there's these, and especially now as a first world country versus like, I watch all these videos of like Ghana, and like, it's just mind blowing to me that we live in a time to where we live like we live. And then in the exact same time, it could be like somebody was living 250, 300 years ago, like where they barely have electricity at all, right? If they have electricity, right? And then if they do have electricity, it's like a single light bulb inside their house, right? Like that's it. And that's, to me, that's just this stark gap between these two worlds that we live in that era. And so coming back around with like what the expectation with government is, you said setting the table, and Adam Snow talked about that a little bit when I had him on the podcast a couple of weeks ago. Is having the government set the table and then allowing the public in the private sector, the private sector and the business sector to come up with these funds.
Right. Yeah.
Which I like that there's some collaboration with.
Yeah, and public-private partnerships are awesome.
Yeah.
They work really well. Like right now, Utah Tech University has this whole innovation campus they're going to be building, and they've strategically focused on 3 industry clusters. So this is a role government, public institutions play that have a huge impact on what the future of our community looks like. So those 3 clusters are desert tech. So you'll see solar, desalination, those type of things, genomics, and I think the third one is sports science. And that builds on existing skill sets we have here, and also problems we have unique insights on. And so, but they're problems that are global problems. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
The city's role in this could be around loosening or creating like sandboxes to innovate around these areas. So maybe I'll step away from those industry clusters and think about like autonomous flying vehicles. There's heavy regulations around that, and it's really difficult. An interesting comparable is Austin, Texas, when autonomous driving and technology started coming to play, came out of Boston and San Francisco. Austin, Texas actually has the most amount of data and insights around autonomous driving vehicles because that city set loosened regulations to allow it to happen. So all these startups started moving there and attracting that talent. And so that's a strategic long-term view that city took to say, we want to attract this type of talent here. We could do the same thing here because when we see this emerging ecosystem around autonomous flying vehicles, I haven't really seen a community that's kind of loosened regulations around that, but we could do that. But
also thinking about a community that could benefit from, because we have a geology and a geography that really bodes well for saying, hey, it's hard to get around.
That's right.
We talked about the subway. Yeah. You're the one that destroyed my subway plans. I was like, man, I feel like we should do subway. But thinking about like public transportation, right? But like getting people around in our town, we have a ton of challenges, right? We have groundwater that disrupts going down, right? But then it also we have hills. Just hills after hills after hills, right? We got to go around them, building roads, and then the way the sun just wreaks havoc on basically everything, right?
Well, this is what's great about not always jumping on the newest innovations all the time. You can be strategic about that, but as new innovations like flying vehicles happen, now we don't have to build a subway system. It's way cheaper, and everybody this government doesn't necessarily have to invest in that massive infrastructure. You buy your own flying vehicle or autonomous driving car or whatever that future might look like.
And I can hear the people now being like, oh yeah, I have loud, these loud drone type things flying over my head all the time, right? Like you just end up with this, there's always this
there's always unintended consequences.
Unintended consequences, right? But coming up with these sandboxes, I like this because it's like a deregulation of certain industries.
Utah did this. We are an SEC sandbox, meaning I think Arizona is the only other state that does this, meaning we could create new innovative financial instruments and test them and not have to comply with the typical SEC requirements until you've really figured it out. And so financial innovation is increased fairly dramatically, from what I understand, in Utah because of that. So we created a SEC sandbox to allow that. Those are great examples of what government can do. Government can set the table. Government can also place strategic investments in things that business and private enterprises may not have the foresight to do, because some of these things are inefficient markets. Like efficient markets are like commodities and financial markets where there's symmetry of information. Everybody has the same information, and so price adjusts quickly. But there are areas in our economy, like I would say real estate, and how we design things, that there's asymmetry of information or a short-term view, and so we might create a scar on the Black Hill because it has a near-term benefit for us. But then now we have this long-term impact of seeing that scar. Those are good examples of like markets that are a little bit less efficient, because they don't have the symmetry of information. And so this is where government can really step in and have a long view and say, well, we're going to place strategic investments or regulations or loosen regulations, 82% of our homes in St. George are single family homes.
Mm-hmm.
And if 80% of our jobs are support blue collar jobs and we make an area median income of under 50K, that's just not sustainable anymore.
Yeah. Cause I think legitimately between, the government, just government jobs and construction jobs, that's like 50% of our entire employment.
Yeah, that's right. And so it was our very first condos that we had in St. George were in the mid 70s.
Yeah.
That was the first time we had a condo. And so
Santa Clara is just now the very first condominium building.
Really?
Is going in Santa Clara.
That's amazing.
It's the very first city ever in southern Utah. 1860 something or whatever.
Yeah.
And their very first condos are going up. But it's their only one. It's the only one slated. And they won't build anymore. This is it, right? Like, but that just to me is crazy.
Well, it's interesting. So like they had to create new regulation and rules and zoning rules around that. And those condos are the ones over by the Red Hills Golf Course, those Spanish style.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah, those were the very first
Jeff
condos.
sold one of those last year.
Exactly, yeah. And so there are new things that we can do. So this is where human-centric design thinking is really important, to think about the client, the patient, the customer, patient, or whatever it might be. Be like, what are we blind to? What are we missing? And I did a attainable housing research project for the city to say, okay, well, what are the personas or the people? Tell me their stories, their dreams, their motivations, the ones that are struggling with
this
housing.
was my favorite. Look, being part of the Housing Action Coalition and like going through this study.
Yeah,
this was so helpful in understanding. And part of it too is like, how do we get this information to everyone to see it?
Yeah,
right? And like really understand this dynamic. Seems like people don't care.
Well, people have to run with it, right? So, like, city government could be a leader in that, if because we may not have the skill set to build certain types of homes, or styles, or whatever that might look like. But it was interesting because I identified in our research at least 4 distinct personas. One I call the emerging contributor. These are ones kind of emerging into the economic ecosystem, whether they're coming out of college or graduating at a switch point. We have single parents, we have mature renters, and I can't remember the 4th one right now.
I know I had it. I would have pulled it up.
I can't remember.
Emerging contributor.
Oh yeah, young couples.
Oh yeah, young couples.
Yeah, and each of them have different dynamics, different needs, and different which then match with different types of housing options. So, for example, we have St. George is great because we have opportunity to build accessory dwelling units that they don't, and there are no impact fees on those. They are limited to 800 square feet. In theory, that's a really great model that aligns well with a single parent that wants to stay in the community that they lived in. Let's say they're recently separated, divorced, building an ADU on top, as part of your single family home out in a suburb neighborhood. It's a great place for that. But 800 square feet is kind of small for a single parent with 2 or 3 kids.
Right.
And so increasing that square footage to, let's say, 1,200 or 1,500 square feet would make a big difference and attract that population potentially.
Yeah.
Versus the emerging contributor, they typically don't have a car. They need to, either get to school or walk to work or use public transportation. And that's the bulk of what we found. We need in downtown environments very much a single family or townhome in downtown, but to see more high density, maybe it's the same price per square foot, but they're smaller units. That's a really good fit there.
Yeah.
Versus a young couple, they might want to they want to start building their financial independence, a tiny home that they could add on over time as their family grows, maybe a little bit out, in a suburb community. That might work really well there too.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a huge opportunity for someone to come and either drive that. And it could be government in creating regulation rules,
or
changes,
deregulating,
upzoning softly, which means if your zone is X, you can do the next level of density up.
Well, yeah, I talked to Stacy Young, and we've talked in excess a bit about this outside of the podcast as well. But looking at the zoning ordinances and just building regulation, right? Take away aside that like impact fees and like the costs of doing those things, but just looking at if I'm because we're going to quickly get into having to say now we're looking at redevelopment issues, right? We're saying that the city's 150 years old, and the bulk of where density should have been were smaller homes. A lot of them are, mobile homes even, right? At a lot of capacity. Is how do we rezone these things in a way that would cause an investor to want to come in and redevelop, because the cost of redevelopment is so much. This is in Ivan City, and I've said this before, but once we build it, that's what we get, right? Until enough time passes to where now we're trying to solve problem, because as much as real estate's an appreciating asset, until you don't have any money to maintain it, and then as it starts to get dilapidated and starts to fall apart, now it's a really expensive house to have to remodel. There's a couple homes downtown that are for sale right now that are you could tell they've been added on to over the decades and things like that, and it's just a hodgepodge mess, and you're like, can anybody even come in here and salvage it, or should it just be bulldozed down and just started over fresh and new, right? And I think from them pulling down the St. George Inn right there on the boulevard, and it being a dirt lot, I mean, that's a prime example of like, hey, when we get into this redevelopment stage of things, the zone can't have all these contingencies attached to it. You can't it can't have all these rules and saying, okay, it has to have this exact setback because of fire code from 1960, right? And like, there's all these things that we can do, I feel like, on the government side of deregulating, and allow the private innovative market to come to the table and say, hey, let me solve the problem.
That's right. Yeah. And with a long-term view, right? So the city might want certain design aspects in the historic district that help kind of foster and preserve some of the historic experience. And we do see some economic benefit of doing that, because it becomes an attraction. Or
and
they might
preserving the heritage too, I think, is really,
heritage,
really
or like I could see a scenario where they're like, let's create a restaurant district, and let's loosen,
like right where the city hall is going, which is just like a perfect location for a city hall, but also would be cool if it was
perfect, because if you think about, let's say if you want to increase more food and restaurant options, the jump from a food truck to a restaurant is giant. It's enormous. And so creating like commercial kitchen, shared space, and this government doesn't necessarily have to do that, but they could say, hey, we want to set the table, get the right people together, and we're going to allow 50 square foot restaurants. Like tiny restaurants that can operate like that with shared kitchen space that could fall under the Department of Health. And there could be some proper oversight.
Part of the problem with the current city council is that they're gonna dink around with a bunch of little tiny nuances that will never result in the execution of a decision.
Yeah, because we listened to the food truck, like because somebody presented doing like a food truck,
like a courtyard,
like a park. I think it was food truck park.
Yeah, they kept going back and forth on like, well, does it need to be concrete or gravel? And I know those are important things, but like the developer can figure that out. He's going to want to do what's best.
He's going to exactly going back to the customer thing is like, hey, who's the customer, right? And then I get that there's these unintended consequences and things like that, but when we over scrutinize these things, it chokes that innovation. I think it chokes that development. I think.
Well, and when you add time to a development, that's where it's really expensive.
Yeah,
because their financing costs are just grow exponentially.
Yeah, and the developer's just going to go do something else somewhere else. Right. I mean, if
and a lot of times they're forced to.
Yeah, because if we can't set the table here in St. George, then they're going to go to Logan or Blackfoot, Idaho, or
Asheville,
wherever.
We've definitely had that experience here. Like I've heard a story. Woman wanted to start a tea shop, and she had the parking requirements to be downtown were still super high here, so she ended up moving to Cedar, I think, to start her shop
because of
there.
parking.
Because she's like, well, I can't actually do that much parking in this area, and
it's fairly walkable, so it seems like it would be.
So I think I mean, it seems like a city's role could be like, hey, what's the right framework? Let's not get so stuck on the check boxes, the details. Let's look at the broader framework and of what we're trying to create as a community. What are our broad values that allow? I like to think of it like the we're a bigger ecosystem now, and I like to think of ecosystems similar to us that I love, that are my favorite. They feel like a mosaic of subcultures. There might be shared values, but then there's a mosaic of subcultures that you see thriving. And so everything feels exciting and new and creative. It doesn't feel homogenous. Homogenous cities are really boring.
Yeah.
And so the city can create some overarching set of values that then guide them on being improving their customer service. You know, the customer service support industry, their goal is decreasing the time to solution and increasing the experience, right? And if a city did that, that'd be incredible.
Yeah.
But I understand that there's rules, regulations, like we can't change the when you building a single family home out in kind of more of a rural area and you're not on a sewer system because of our geology. There's challenges with how we do our septic system. Yeah. And so we have to have higher density or lower density of those homes because of the way our geology is, from what I understand, versus other areas where they don't have that same issue, like in Iron County even. Right. You know, they have higher density with septic systems.
Yeah, because the substrate can process.
Yeah, and we want the city to be conscientious of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Like
it's important that they're focused on the things that like poop.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Like,
we don't want it to destroy our.
We want the government
system
to deal with this shit.
Yeah, exactly.
We want our government to focus on poop.
I was thinking about that the other day because I was driving back from Central and I was thinking about this specific rule because I think you can't. I think you have to have 7 to 8 acres. I think to build a single family home, and obviously it has to perk. You know, you have to get a perk test to be able to put a septic on unless you have like an over-engineered septic system. And I've seen some crazy septic systems recently that are
advanced ones.
Well, that are older that I'm like, I don't know how this thing even works. It does not seem like that's that wasn't real well thought out. I was like, it seems like there's not a whole lot of innovation when it's come to the whole septic system type thing. But I have another friend who this is what he does. He works on water treatment and water waste management. So him and I have talked quite a bit about, like how do we handle that kind of thing. But I know that they're trying to expand out in Dameron Valley and Diamond Valley and, how do they treat the water and how do they create a sewer system that doesn't necessarily have to come all the way down into St. George, right? Smaller systems and things like that. But, that is infrastructure. I think this is kind of bringing me back to kind of where I was when we were talking about innovation and, looking forward thinking, right? That technology and having the government factor in a role there. I can't help but think that this is a time when government should really be doubling down on infrastructure because across the board, I mean, 99 out of 100 people surveyed in St. George would say we're growing too fast. Do you agree? Do you agree with that? Or do you agree that people probably think that? You've probably heard that yourself?
Yeah, definitely people think that and they feel it because there is I mean, when I was born, there was like less than 20,000 people in the whole county, and now there's 200,000 people. So for me, I feel like St. George has been, like the whole county's been growing super fast my entire life. So I'm probably used to it. People are always uncomfortable with change. Yeah. Is it too fast? I don't know. I mean, I think there's always challenges with growth and
what's fast enough? Like where's this balance? I think that's kind of a question that I had, but then it makes me think, okay, if they're feeling that, what is it about the environment that's making them feel that way? And a lot of times I hear, like traffic. Seems traffic is like the biggest part of it, right? And so thinking about, okay, do we have to solve the problem because this is what they feel like, or are we just not all connected yet, right? We're growing. It's like not all of the parts have been, even the trail system, right? I talked to Kent Perkins and, we had this vision for this trail system, but it takes time to piece all of them together. And it's like, well, when it was just one strip of trail, it was like, well, you got like 200 yards of trail, sweet. Can we get a couple more trails here? Because this isn't quite enough, right?
That's right.
So I can't help but think part of the traffic problem is that we just haven't run the timeline out long enough to be able to connect all of the system as what it would look like.
There's definitely that, but also this is where government could have a great role in helping create zoning rules that allow clusters of commercial space that actually intentionally create these mosaic of subcultures. And so, because we tend to see commercial areas become the boundaries of these kind of distinct communities. And I mean, I tell people I've lived from California to Boston, Denver, lived in Eastern Europe, that kind of stuff. And I drive more here than I feel like I have anywhere else because the commercial areas are a little bit further away. You can't just like walk to store. So if I want to go run errands on a weekend, it's like I go east to go to Lowe's or Home Depot. I go west to go grocery shopping. I go, so I have to do a bit more driving than I did when I was even living in Salt
And
Lake
it's
City.
very strip mall-esque, right? Like if you think of like River Road, you're like, even if I wanted to walk to, even though all the stores are right there, it's not like I'm going to go walk. It's not like a walkable area.
Yeah.
It's
So we tend to see these like starburst clusters of commercial space that kind of help decrease the traffic. So it's a multi-pronged approach.
So my question though would be, even if we did that, would businesses go into those spaces based off the population? Because I feel like we have some concentrated areas of population, but we're also still kind of spread out. So like for someone to say, hey, I'm going to go open like a smaller type grocery store, and I'm thinking of like Digby's Market, is that even looking at Digby's Market, it's rarely all that busy, and I know there's not a big margin in that to begin with, right? So like there's a lot of businesses that require a big turnover of just humans coming through the door, right? A lot of transactions, and so even though we're growing, are we quite there for the population to support even these micro, commercial spaces?
Yeah, it's a good question because a lot of times with real estate, now
it's chicken and the egg. It goes back to the chicken.
Yeah, and
I need the population to support the business.
If you're creating a kind of a new space, like let's say it's a new commercial area, I mean, there might be enough population for the private market to kind of do that, but there might be scenarios where there isn't, and there might be a first mover disadvantage, which then creates a barrier. But once there is that first mover, then there's a positive halo effect around that, and that's not uncommon in real estate. Where
it's almost like if you build it, they will come.
Yeah,
like a golf course.
That's right. And so you do see areas where maybe the first mover, if they were doing a small thing, so if there was enough, like a big enough developer that had enough financing behind them, maybe they can own the whole that whole area, and they can basically be their own first mover disadvantage, but then take a benefit once they created that nucleus, take a benefit of the additional developments that happen beyond that.
Because Desert Color, if you look at Desert Color as a development itself, they didn't build the commercial first.
No, they did the
right?
real estate. Yeah,
they've done all the
is.
residential stuff first.
That's right.
And now they have a population out there, and only now are you going to start to see, I think, some of that commercial stuff start to pop up.
Yeah. So what you've highlighted is there's a lot of different approaches to this, right? Government could take a role in that and be like create financial incentives or tax benefits or whatever, if they want to seed something, or private industry can do, and it kind of just depends on the scenario. And so I think I'm excited to see how St. George evolves and solves that issue.
Yeah.
I mean, we honestly do not have the traffic issues that I've experienced in other communities. Like, it's pretty amazing here still. It's just different from what we've had before.
I always tell people that that they need to go work in like Denver.
Yeah.
And have to commute 15, 20 miles outside of Denver every day. And then they'd appreciate the traffic situation we're in here in St. George.
But the people here will be like, well, that's why we don't live in Denver, Jeff.
Yeah.
That's why we moved here, right? Because I hated that before. Yeah. And I get that. So, and then part of me just thinks, no matter what we do, we're going to have that. There's going to be a segment of the population that feels that way, right?
That's right. Yeah. Well, and I guess 2 points. One is we live in a world that's relative. So nothing really makes sense to us unless it's compared against something.
Yeah.
And so, like with traffic, if we've lived here our whole life, then it feels busy because that's what we were used to. But if our baseline is Denver, then it feels different, right? And a lot of our learning insights come from, this comparison. I mean, we do live in this world of relativity. And so I think that's important to recognize. Also, this is why I talk about human-centric design thinking, because it allows you to empathetically sit in somebody else's shoes and really understand kind of what they're thinking, feeling, and what their relative experience is. Or at least try to understand, knowing that you'll never fully understand. Then that helps us understand how we can solve that, that specific problem.
I think that empathetic trait is something we need out of like those city council members, like those people that are sitting there as a council, right? Is like seeking to understand and knowing that there's not going to be a perfect scenario, right? We're never going to fully be able to have this total consensus on ideas, but are we fostering an environment where people can discuss those things, right?
Not everything has to be a fight.
Yeah, I mean, there's three things I think I look for in a public official, and I kind of classify them as head, heart, hands. Head, being able to objectively sit in something, see all sides of the issue, try to understand, ask questions. Heart, being able to advocate for population that you have no emotional tie to necessarily. Like you're advocating on behalf of somebody, knowing that you don't fully understand that situation or scenario, but you can advocate for them. And then hands, being able to have the courage, the bravery to actually do the work to make it happen. Yeah. Because changing things, adding, like creating a new zoning rule, even, it's not easy, right? Because there's lots of things, there's lots of interdependencies to make that happen. And there's people you have to get on board, training, like change management's very, very difficult. And so you need to have the courage, the bravery, and the tenacity to be able to do that. And we have a lot of...
I don't know, Rick, they fired the city manager pretty easily.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's a whole other thing.
My challenge, or maybe just because I don't know, on like a zoning change, for example, it seems and feels, which are two words, in the business world that you're supposed to never use, but it seems and feels like a zoning change should be pretty easy to do.
Well, yes, I think in all practice, it can be easy.
And I bring that up because there's some property right off a bluff. I mean, Rob, you know what property I'm talking about, that in the real world, it seems like the perfect spot for a few different types of developments. And it just won't happen. So.
And that's true. And government's intentionally designed to be slow moving, and there's good reason for that. Because we don't want to make knee-jerk reactions to things and have this unintended consequence that we haven't fully thought out.
I almost would say, Jeff, it's the opposite. I think zoning changes should be actually really difficult, but that the zoning on it should be a thought out zoning that is intended to be long term, right? It doesn't have this, it just changes with the winds of whoever owns the property at whatever, right? There's a legitimate thought and design around, okay, how do we want to create, let's start with 50 years from now and work backwards from there and say, okay, there's a broad option of things that can go here. It's not so narrowed, because what we did was we went from agriculture to a catch-all, which was residential, R110, right? It's like the catch-all would be, well, a simple house is something we can understand conceptually, and it's not going to get too far out of the box, and we're going to start with that. And then if you want to change it from residential, then you can come up with your idea. But it's like this big old world of options versus saying, we're going to say this is generally speaking a residential from high density all the way down to, a single family, right? Get the whole broad of residential, right? So you're not necessarily jumping into these massive categories of residential to commercial or industrial, right? Like these big jumps. I think it should be a broader definition of what that zone is, and then make it really tough to change that.
Yeah,
and then have ordinances in place.
I guess what I'm hearing you say is having a clear vision of what the future looks like the city's been doing, the downtown city plan.
Yeah, because you
and
can
then
think
using that as a guide. And
because
then maybe
infrastructure, you're like, I have a school here,
Yeah.
and then I want people to live by the school.
Yeah.
So if I put the investment into putting a school here, I don't want all this residential space to turn into commercial, and then now there's nobody to go to school in that area, right?
That's right.
Or
Yeah.
or water, or septic, or public transportation, right? It's like, well, you put all this investment in making sure that public transportation has access here because people live here, and then all of a sudden it's a commercial zone, right?
Yeah.
So, but in general speaking, does that make sense, Jeff? Do you see where I'm coming from on that side?
Yeah, I for sure can appreciate that. I guess my other pushback would be like, and Rick, I mean, you're born and raised here, so take us back to 2010. St. George is just recovering from 2008. I think it would be virtually impossible to look at the city government back then and think that 13 years later we're going to be at a population that's, probably 50 to 75% more than in 2010. I mean, I also feel like the government should take a look at how quickly we've developed in some aspects of the community and react to it in, not a knee-jerk way, but more of a process where it's like, hey, look, this zoning change makes sense for the majority of people around the zone for where it's at. Let's get this thing done and move forward.
Yeah, and like having that vision set, knowing the direction we're going to go makes a huge difference. I mean, I remember in high school talking to Gary Esplin, I think is his name. He was the city manager at the time. And I was like worried. I was like, we're growing really fast. Like, what's going on? And this was back like, 30 years ago, 25 years ago. And he showed me his kind of huge vision and plan, and the Southern Parkway is part of that, and mapping out the transportation system and that kind of stuff. And it takes a long time for those things to come to fruition, but it's been really fun. Now in my 43 years old, seeing a lot of those things that I remember talking to him about actually happened.
Yeah.
And those are the types of people that we need to have, that long-term view, and kind of what your point is, like they're just aware of what is happening and the growth. And I remember him talking about, we are going to grow really fast and we're going to continue growing. And so we need to be ahead of it.
Yeah.
And so I've been really impressed with St. George overall, and even Washington County, in just kind of how they are thinking about it compared to communities like Denver, where I lived as well. And it felt like they were aware of that the development's going to happen, but then they didn't want to invest in like big infrastructure projects like the freeway systems.
Yeah.
And they're still like 2-lane roads, and they're a nightmare.
Yeah.
So I think that long-term view is really important. The challenge, I think, is it shifts when you have new leadership all the time.
Yeah.
And so we do have to come to a consensus of what that future looks like for us. That's why I'm excited about the downtown city plan, because I think a lot of that made sense, at least some of the early releases I've seen, because it creates these kind of like pockets of residential areas within a downtown environment, and the citizens have to be on board with it too, the vision. And our citizens might be really uncomfortable with creating like a high-rise downtown community right now, and maybe we never are that, and that's totally fine. Like there's lots of different options you can have as a community in a city.
Yeah.
But we do have to be able to identify what is distinct about our community, and why do businesses and people want to come live here, move here? Why do people want to vacation, shop, spend money? We do have to be pretty distinct of what that is. And every institution has to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, this is what has been what I've been impressed with the university, is that's the first open enrollment polytechnic university in the country.
Yeah.
That's incredible. I mean, all the polytechnic universities are not open enrollment. You have to apply, get accepted, and they're very difficult. And now with that shift under leadership of President Williams, they're at the seat of the table with like Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech. Now they're being invited in these meetings, and they're they have a distinct flavor of what a polytechnic university is, because it's not just technology and STEM programs. It's like humanities, arts, because that technology has an impact, can have an impact on all those areas.
Yeah, we've crossed over into this revolution of industry, right? From a service economy to, we're going to transition into this technology economy, and technology being, it used to be a sword, right? Like the people that had the most, the empires with the most advanced technology were the dominating force, right? And that was really typically when it came to like warring, right? Elements, right? Swords and tanks and whatever it might be. But now we've crossed over and outside of this service industry to this service technology side where it's penetrated every part of the job market.
That's right. Yeah. And I kind of see it as kind of diversifying our economy more than anything. It's like
decentralizing.
Yeah. It's not going to take away from the service economy necessarily. It's probably going to add to it.
Yeah.
And I'm starting to kind of sense and see we're going to have entrepreneurs that are like the entrepreneurs we've been talking about that have global customers, raise global capital, could go public, do IPOs, things like that. But I also think we'll still continue seeing the types of startups that St. George has really been fully about, which is maybe mainstream businesses or service-based businesses, because there's a lot of value in those types of companies as well. Just the difference is the owners tend to make the money in those, not as much the employees. The employees get paid kind of the typical wage here, versus like more of the scalable global startups, more of the employees get paid higher. And so I just think we'll see a diversification of our economy, which is pretty exciting because then it gives people options. That's what I like seeing, is people be able to have options, choose, and also trust in their skill sets and capabilities of navigating and changing with changing times. If we just kind of close our eyes and say we're not changing, doing anything, we'll be left behind. Like the future of economies, I believe, are the people who are going to be the most curious. Yeah. People asking questions, not the people that are hard-headed and think they're the right and think God is guiding them and they don't have to listen to anybody else. It's going to be the people who are curious and asking the right questions or asking the most interesting questions. I mean, this is how AI works. Yeah. You have to give it a prompt. You have to give it guidance, and then you get amazing outcomes. But if you don't do that, you get really crappy, low-grade outcomes.
Well, and I'll say this in defense of the ones that let God guide them, because I'm one that lets God guide them. Thinking of it less in terms of saying God's going to...
and what I mean is I'm right, you're wrong.
Yeah,
model.
right. Like it's saying I have a self-righteous mandate to drive forward with whatever it is that I'm doing, because I'm being led solely by a divine entity that nobody else necessarily can see or hear. And so I feel this unwavering ability to just act in whatever way I want to act, right? Which I don't at least Jesus, who I follow, is not that perspective, because he says to love your enemy,
right? Exactly.
Is to when your enemy sins against you, you go and love them, you hug them, you forgive them for those things. It's not the one where it's go out and steamroll and
whatever your value set is, whether it's a God, religion, or I have friends who are atheists, and that guides them in making good decisions. I think my key is just using that to guide you and not critiquing and judging others. But as we approach others, we have an open mind and empathy and curiosity, ask questions, because we all learn from that. Yeah. Because if we can't even understand the universe, how could we claim to understand if there is a God, what God thinks, feels all the time for everyone? And the way I am interpreting it is the way you need to be living your life.
It's funny.
We don't even understand dark matter,
the Webb
telescope.
The Webb telescope. Yeah. It's like almost daily, because I read so many articles, and Google just gives you what you want more of. It's like almost every single day, there's an article that says the Webb telescope detected something that shouldn't exist. Yeah, like almost every day, another thing. It's like, oh, we just saw this thing in this nebula that this shouldn't exist. We don't know what this is, right? It's every single day we're just discovering more and more, and our understanding of even history, right? Like discovering stuff that, fundamentally changes what we thought how long people lived in this area and all these things. We're just constantly discovering more stuff. It's just this, endless peeling back.
As advanced as medical science is, we don't even know what the appendix does.
Oh, yeah. We don't know how consciousness, there's so many things we don't know. And I think that's, especially those of us who grew up in really strong religious communities, which I feel so grateful to have had that. A lot of times there was so much quote unquote clarity and black and white thinking in that, saying this is exactly how the world works and operates. But science is interesting because science is more what you're talking about, where it's always new discovery, insights, learnings, and it makes mistakes, but it's objective in terms of how it gets that feedback, evolves, and improves. And so I think with the increasing speed of innovation, having a guide, value set, or divine, or whatever that might be, is super important because it helps you, know how to love your neighbors, your community, and be a good person, whatever that might be to you. But also living in another camp at the same time, where you can be objective and learn and challenge your own belief systems, or the way you think the world might work. And I think this is maybe why some people don't necessarily trust science all the time, because they're like, it's changing all the time. Like I was told this cholesterol is bad, now this is good, and now like these new diet plans and all this new science is changing all the time. That's the reality. It's always because we're getting new insights.
That's like what science is, though. Is like scientists don't even trust the science because you're constantly testing theories and new discoveries are coming out based off of failed tests on old ones and stuff like that. So you always hear, at least recently you've heard, trust the science, but scientists don't even trust the science.
Right. That's why you have to have a critical eye and critical thinking.
Well, and then it's complex. Life's complex. And all the systems that we create, they're complex. So like, the science of the human body, for an example, is it's so insanely, infinitely complex and interconnected. My son has type 1 diabetes, right? And my wife was just texting me that his glucose is like 351, right? It's like 3 times as high as it should be, right? And we gave him insulin. We have 2 different types of insulin that work because, the pancreas is this miraculous thing that you just can't imagine how quickly it functions. Like how quickly it reacts to just you. It's almost like it knows what's in your mouth. Truthfully, like I'm not even kidding. Like it seems to me like your body is so in tuned with what's happening on this cellular, electrical level, that when something like the pancreas doesn't work anymore, and you're like trying to you're supplementing this thing that your body's supposed to do. It's this 100. It's infinitely. It keeps us up at night, man. Like
Rob, I've heard
every night.
Your pancreas reacts to smells too. So like like I'll take a big sniff of like a piece of cake, and I'll feel it, like almost like I ate it.
And your body's like, oh, I gotta get ready for this thing. You know what I mean? It's like, release the insulin.
Start preparing for this massive amount.
So thinking about like this, and there's like 56 different things that can impact your glucose levels, just like the way your body handles sugar, and whether it's complex sugar or simple sugar, right? So like I'm not feeling good, or how much energy, how much activity I got, how much sleep I got, how much am I in a stress situation or not in a stress situation, the hormone levels, like because I got a growing kid, right? There's 56 different things that like impact this thing. It's like impossible to really like try to hold on to, right? It's just like this wiggly thing, and that's just this one element, but that is an example of all of like society is uber complex. Climate, like environmental, the idea that we can control climate, to me, it's laughable, because I'm like, all the science and all the research we could do about this one thing, yet a volcano explodes and puts more carbon into the atmosphere than all 100 years of us driving cars, right? Like one volcano put more carbon into the atmosphere. And we think that we have this control, this lever that literally is going to disrupt societies.
And I think that ego has always been important in helping us be creative and innovative. And I think I like to reframe. I'd like to reframe the way we think about change all the time, like new insights and discoveries and that kind of stuff, because it feels scary to if things are changing all the time. It's like, what do I do? Like I can't build create or innovate or build a life if things are changing all the time. So I need some stability. At the same time, because we're always gaining new insights and discoveries. I mean, we hardly know anything about metaphysics, and does not operate on the same rules that the world of relativity lives in.
Right.
And as we get new insights and discovery, that creates more opportunities for us to innovate and create and solve new problems. And that's what advances us as an economy, a people, helps us improve our way of life. If everything was static and there was no new insights ever, we would create our own issues. So there is a study called Universe 25, and it's really interesting. It was, I think in the 70s, it was trying to replicate utopia for mice. If they had all the resources and everything they needed, what would happen? Well, they didn't even meet capacity within that universe. They imploded, basically. They started creating their own problems. I think mothers just focused more on grooming, and there was a couple strong male mice. The weaker male mice were hiding in the rafters. They were, their own children were dying. Like, they were creating their own issues, even though they had all the resources, capabilities, that they needed. If we don't have continual growth, change, challenges to overcome, we'll create worse ones.
Yeah. Or we'll create ones that make no sense.
Yeah.
Like we dive off into chaos, right? And almost like an insanity, right? We almost like lose our minds into it. And this is an odd transition of going into mental health, but like truthfully, I feel like we got to that level within, at least culturally, like within the United States, because we had these generations of relative peace and tons of prosperity, and I can't help but just the baby boomer generation, right? They came back from World War II. Their parents came back from World War II and created literally an entire lifetime of like easy living, right? Like classic cars. Like you think of like Americana over the 60s, 70s, 80s, and into the 90s, and it was we've started to create our own just oddly insane challenges, and then you add drug use into this, right? And part of that comes from maybe a dysfunctional family element, right? But maybe talk to me about where you're at with like the mental health, and because what I can't help but think is like as St. George starts to grow, we're gonna have the haves and have-nots are going to continue to challenge us, right? And we have Switch Point with some solutions with homelessness, but it seems like mental health is an underlying stability within our society that we need to always be looking at, even if we might not necessarily have. We got to look at the problem before we have a problem, right? Yeah. But I think culturally across the country we have the problem. Do we have it necessarily here in St. George? Maybe at a different capacity, but
yeah, it's I mean, when we think about mental health and wellness, let's say, what does that look like when it's we'd call it flourishing? You're thriving. You have fulfillment in life. It's not feeling happiness all the time. It's not feeling all the quote unquote positive energy emotions. It's feeling all the emotions and understanding them and having a high emotional intelligence, recognizing, okay, I'm self-aware of these emotions. I'm managing them. I'm expressing them. I'm having empathy for others. It's those type of things that we want to see. And to get there, it's a kind of a trial and error. You're going through your own struggles and challenges or insights, and you're learning. We tend to see the common denominator in individuals that had really traumatic, like abuse upbringings, the ones that were able to flourish outside of that, which is only about 25%. Those 25% doesn't mean 25% will only ever do that. It just means what they found in this is called the Kauai study. It's a longitudinal study. They found in those 25% of kids that came out of those really severe abusive upbringings, they all had a non-family member mentor in their lives. Could have been an aunt, uncle, grandparent, someone who didn't live in their household. Could have been a family, a friend, a teacher, someone like that. Because in those times when you're struggling, we all need somebody, we need community in our lives that we can see ourselves through. Because when we're, being really hard on ourselves, this is why it's important to have a good community, family, neighborhood, friends, your tribe. And I think we're kind of in a social kind of redesign of that. So when I think about my parents, my dad's and my mom's drive were basically get off the ranch or out of poverty. And so that was, when you think of Maslow's hierarchy, that's kind of the bottom level. Physiological and safety needs, the bottom two areas. And now I was born into an environment where I didn't necessarily have to struggle for food, but I had to struggle to discover, what fulfillment brings to me. What does that look like? How do I have an impact on the world? How the world's different because I'm here. And that's moving up higher in the Maslow's hierarchy. And that was a gift that our previous generation gave many of us. Now, not everybody's in that area, and it doesn't really matter where you're at. I think what matters is like understanding kind of who am I? Where do I find fulfillment? It's really about food security, and I need to have the physiological needs or the safety needs I have, and working towards that. Having those types of, I think they're just kind of different challenges to face. So like the challenge, how my parents face those challenges, it's different than the way this new generation is going to face those challenges. It's like moving towards self-actualization. That's a totally different level of challenges. The problem, this is where community becomes really important in kind of navigating some of that. And once you do that, then you build grit, reliance in yourself. You build confidence. I like to think about it as compounding confidence. So I have a finance background, right? We think of, if you want to make money, you kind of lean into that compounding interest model. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing with confidence. Little baby steps, little wins, build the confidence to do bigger things.
Larry Summers, I was listening to it. He did a talk just the other day, and he said we went from where what we do gives us confidence, mm-hmm. right? Like the success gives us confidence, from confidence equals success, right?
Yeah.
Like today we're doing where confidence, it just have the confidence and you'll be successful, mm-hmm. versus be successful and you'll gain confidence.
Yeah,
right.
That's why it's compounding confidence, right?
Yeah.
Try little things.
Like societally, we flip those two things over. Mm-hmm. We got to go back to. We got to have successes to build that confidence. We got to continue to succeed.
That's right. Yeah. Even if you wake up in the morning and you're feeling weird, you're off, you're feeling, you have a weird vibe. Use that strategy. So maybe you need to play the New York Times Wordle and have a win, and then that builds the confidence to go to the gym, and then go to the gym. You're like, okay, I'm building this win. So this is what resilience looks like, right? It's knowing the tools that work for you. So everybody has a different, I think of it as an energy equation. What are the things that create energy for you? What are the things that consume energy? Mm-hmm. And what are the things that are important to you? And it's just optimizing that equation and because as we live in a more connected global society, there's more energy demands on us. And I think this is why people push back on others that are demanding space for them. If I come to you and say, you need to do this for me, and you need to, call me this certain name or treat me like this, and I'm demanding that from you, that's going to be an energy drain on you. And we're all biological beings that are about energy preservation. And I think a lot of this is kind of a natural biological response where I'm going to preserve this energy for the things that I know matter the most to me and my family and my loved ones. And that's totally normal. That's totally fine, right? Yeah. I think we just need to recognize that and then optimize your own energy equation, because we live in a hyperactive, hive mind world where we're connected 24/7. It doesn't mean you have to be connected 24/7. Yeah. I mean, in fact, I started paying attention to the unconscious energy drains in my life, which was getting a text message when I was in a meeting when I couldn't even read the text message. Getting a text message, not even able to read it, but knowing I got a text message was subconsciously draining energy in my mind. Yeah. And so I just turned off those notifications. The only notifications I have is calendar alerts and text messages when I'm not busy. Yeah. And so I'm putting boundaries on when I receive information. Yeah. Because I don't want to demand on other people when they should be sending me information. They should be able to send information, data, whatever, 24/7. We live in this connected world. I don't have to receive it 24/7. And I think that this is what, going back to mental health, this is kind of what I would say I'm seeing. So I have a startup in mental health. We serve college students, university students, and we see a lot of this. It's just knowing how to set your boundaries of when you're receiving information, knowing what's important to you. We're told all the time what's important to us. We have to decide, okay, well, does that align with my vision of who I want to become, and be able to optimize this energy equation? It almost kind of everything is boiled down to that, outside of areas where you might see some really traumatic experiences that someone needs to work through. But what I've noticed in my own personal experience, I've gone to therapy, I've also gone to coaching, and they've added different levels of benefit to my life where I didn't have a lot of my own kind of version of trauma and overcoming insecurities and things like that. And that was my view of the world. But a lot of it was just understanding how the world's different because I'm in it, what's my purpose in life, and coaching seemed to work really well for me there. To get to that point, I had to do little things first. I had to address some of the little areas where I was insecure in my life that gave me the confidence to address the bigger things, And so it was
building. It was for sure a building path.
And this is when I think about the mental health industry. I think where I'd like to see where that evolve is more of a collaborative care kind of customer service model where it's not forcing you to go address the heaviest things in your life first, where we triage typically.
So tell me about your childhood.
Yeah, let's dive into the deepest, most uncomfortable abscesses of your life. But let's figure out where you're at today and what are the things that you want to accomplish that might build the confidence to address some of the bigger things that you
I think there's a difference between like a full reprogram, right? Because I think there's probably scales of, not probably, there's for sure like a sliding scale of mental health, right? And I think like what I found when you were talking to me about, especially for like college kids, like figuring out how do we address mental health in college kids, especially knowing that the parents of them, a big percentage of them probably didn't necessarily teach them how to handle that. We're coming from a few generations of, how do we address the complexities of social media and this connected environment where, the two generations, right? Because you're on like the young age of Gen X, right? So you're like in between X and millennial, right?
Gen X, that's right. Yep.
And so, but thinking like, they grew up all without any of the social media, all without this connectedness, right? Cell phones were a thing and pagers, and you had some connected, far more than the boomer generation. But thinking of like the college kids now, where they grew up with being able to redirect, right? They had an emotion and they were immediately able to redirect and take their mind off that, never really be able to deal with it. And so then how do we approach that mental health for them? Because the way they're going to handle those things is going to be totally different than the generations before them, right?
Yep.
And so catching them earlier on as they're growing into their adulthood, right? Especially hopefully before they have kids, right? So that they can kind of help give them tools, their kids tools. I think that's brilliant, right? And
you have to have, if you had bulldozer parents and you never had any struggles in your life and then you were thrown into college, that's going to be a very difficult experience.
Yeah.
But if you've had opportunities to challenge yourself, do hard things, build confidence, then walking into a whole new adult transition experience like that, you'll have a lot more capability and resources to pull on. So when we think about sustainable change, what it is being able to draw on past experiences you've had in successes that may not be totally relevant, but it might give you an insight. It's like, oh, I did that hard thing. I can do this hard thing. Like I climbed Kilimanjaro, and that was a long slog and a difficult process. I can run this marathon, or I could move into this new environment and make new friends because I did it in this past experience, even though it was lesser degree or less serious. Those are the types of things that create kind of healthy, emotionally intelligent individuals, be able to experience all the emotions, understand them, talk about them, recognize them. And some families, granted, were amazing at it. Like some of the kids that I've met, we a lot of our program is around bringing on college students and training as peer coaches to provide support for their peers. Phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. And others are struggling, and that's fine. We've always had those type of things. I think the key is just recognizing that we shouldn't always just eliminate struggles and challenges from our life. We should allow ourselves to experience all the emotions. All emotions are good. They're all teachers. They're all there to guide us, and we can learn from those. To be able to feel safe doing that, you either have to have past experiences that you've overcome and accomplished things, or you have a community that provides that safety. I think a thing to remember with mental health. So mental illness is not contagious, but mental unwellness is. So panic attack, fear, anxiety, depression, but so is wellness. So confidence, calmness, peace. Like you could walk in a room of anxious people, and if you were calm, you can calm an entire room. But schizophrenia isn't contagious necessarily.
Right.
And so there's the way I think about the mental health industry is there's the way the industry looks at the way you feel about it as an individual. And that's two intersecting dimensions. And also there's different levels of severity. We always think mental illness is chronic, but it's not necessarily chronic. There's mental injuries also, and we all have those.
Yeah.
And so addressing these little pains or these little injuries is a way to actually build confidence and increase your emotional intelligence and your emotional well-being, and to be able to be in the flourishing side of that, that spectrum. But doesn't mean you're always going to be there. You're going to be, there's going to be times where you're going to be languishing, which is, I don't have a mental illness, but I'm unwell and I feel like things are off and I have less fulfillment and purpose in our life. And we see a lot of this. This is about 40% of the population right now, if not more. And we all saw that during COVID, especially. Those aren't diagnosable mental illnesses. So technically you wouldn't qualify for therapy because you can't get a diagnosis. But this is where kind of building your own, having a healthy community, finding areas of fulfillment, be able to sit in uncomfortable emotions and learn from those and trust in your ability to navigate those is really important, especially as we become adults. So right now, as kids are moving into adulthood, these are the most critical times in their life to build those skill sets that will impact them throughout the rest of their life. Yeah. Knowing how to trust their ability to navigate new environments, new scenarios. Because we're just going to get more and more of that with how fast the world is changing, evolving.
I think the last thing on this point, because I'm hoping that somebody in college is listening to this conversation. I hope this is something. The most excited part about having you on is you're coming to it from a perspective of, like, let's look long term. Like, let's get a innovative, visionary idea of what Southern Utah could look like, right? But looking at the university as this big, important subculture within the community that is going to reverberate throughout, right? I'm hoping that the college kids are listening somewhat to the podcast, right? Because this is an innovative way of educating the community, right? Having this, this whole experiment is trying to say, hey, there's no local radio, like news communication, because the kids aren't listening to that, but even young people, social media is where people are getting their news from. So this is kind of an innovative thing. So I'm hoping that the kids are listening to this one. Mental health, access to that. Thinking about when I was in my early 20s and thinking, oh man, I probably should talk to somebody about this thing, right? But not really knowing how to go about it. I think it was awesome that this is coming from, within the school, and then it's a digital type access to it. So maybe walk through if you're feeling like you need to talk to somebody, or you're like, hey, I need to talk to somebody about something, or not feeling great. Where do they go? What do they do?
Yeah. So if you're a college student and we're at that university, it's usually covered by the university. It's either the university or the state. And so it's free to the student. A lot of times we live in this world where I'm not really sure what to do. It's like, do I need to see a therapist, or
and then how do I pick one?
How do I pick one? And so our model sort of allows anybody to show up anywhere. So we have two kind of platforms. One is kind of an intake phone line, and it's like a consultation line almost. It's like an on-demand therapy session, or it can be, hey, like, this is what I'm experiencing. Should I schedule a meeting with a therapist or go to a coach? Because the coach world, and I'm really passionate about this because coaching changed my life, because it helped me identify what my purpose looks like, and where
it's not
I
necessarily
find fulfillment.
but like breaking down past trauma.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, how
what
do
does the future look like?
What do you
to
have?
me?
Yep.
Yeah. How do I navigate that? And so we have the alternative to therapy, and that on-demand consultation line is on scheduling, doing a virtual session with the coach. So you go through, select what you're looking for in a coach, your interests, what's your kind of what outcome you're looking for, that kind of stuff. And then that does an optimization matching with a coach that fits your profile, what you're looking for. And then you get to select which coach you want to, and then you just get an appointment. So it's all virtual. They're all real people. We also have a coach bot that we've launched less than a year ago, and that's been wildly successful. And this is one thing that I think will be interesting with AI as it's moving into the mental health space, is it creates kind of a low barrier to discover what should I do next.
Yeah.
And it's not going to necessarily do diagnosis right now. I mean, I could see a world where it could get there, but it might be more helpful with AI to help you navigate. Okay, what should I do? What's the next step, or who should I see?
It's almost like a, do you know Office Space? If you remember, It's like the jump to the jump to Matt. Remember how he's like you jump to a conclusion, right? But it reminds me, like, you go to the bot and it's like, hey, this is what I'm thinking. He's like, okay, well, do you want to go option A or option B? And like, well, I kind of more around option B. Like, okay, and it sets up this whole other example, right? And kind of this almost a decision tree of a navigation tool. Right, you're just trying to flush out ideas and thoughts, and
that's right. And so there's like this is why I like the coaching world so much. In when it comes to health and wellness, is because as opposed to like an athletic coach where it says I'm kind of an expert and this is where I'm going to place you and that kind of stuff,
and you got to do it this way.
Yeah, and the health and wellness world, the coach is said kind of ask you powerful questions to help you hear yourself and say, this is the next thing I want to work on. Now, coaches won't work on things that are around mental illness that are diagnosable, but they can work in conjunction with the therapist to create sustainable change. If you want to make some movement or change your life, whether it's around physical health, like, improving your eating or health or whatever, or resolving some of the mental health concerns that you may have. Because a lot of there's many aspects of mental health that are resolvable, like anxiety and depression. There are ways to resolve that, actually, if you catch them early enough in building healthy coping mechanisms. But the thing to remember also about mental health is there's no clinical markers, biological markers right now that we can see in mental illness. Like, it doesn't show up in your genetic code. There might be things that show up in, the vibration patterns of your atoms or something. We don't really know. But I think the thing to remember is, and Gabor Mate talks about this in his book, about how all mental health is a response to pain and suffering. And pain and suffering is actually part of human life. Right. And so having a support system and community to build healthy coping mechanisms helps you navigate some of those challenges. So it might feel like a mental injury, but it doesn't mean you're stuck in that forever. I think, and also it's like your identity isn't your diagnosed mental illness either. It might be a part of you, and maybe you do have some of the mental illness that is chronic, schizophrenia or psychopathy or something like that. But that recognition that you are more than that also is really important. And then the world can be different because you're here.
Yeah. Dude, thanks for coming on the podcast. So for the mental illness, where do they go? Like, if they're on campus?
Yeah, Trula.com, Trula.com. That's if they want to sign up for coaching or mental health support.
And then Innovation Plaza, Atwood Innovation Plaza. You could just Google Atwood Innovation Plaza.
Yeah, if you're in St. George, you can. They do a bunch of events. The Business Resource Center, the Zions Bank Business Resource Center, is kind of like the main entry door. And the team that runs that they're awesome. But they kind of oversee all of Innovation Plaza. Yeah, but you can also just go sign up for the Makerspace, get trained on.
Yeah, the Makerspace is cool.
You can learn how to 3D printers.
Embroidery, vinyl printing,
and it's super cheap. It's like I think it's like $250 a half hour to rent equipment.
Yeah, it's definitely the most affordable way if you're a creator and if you want to learn a new skill, it's another piece. But if you want to even create a new business, right? You have a business idea and you want to get into an incubator,
run a prototype. Like when I was talking earlier in the podcast about Hunter Mann's and desalination equipment, like
look up Hunter Mann's.
He did his first
that's great.
Prototype in the Makerspace.
That's amazing.
But then at full scale manufacturing, we had to find outside partners. But it was that's exactly where we needed to start. So
it's a wild journey. But thanks for being on the podcast, man. I appreciate it. I'm sure we're going to talk again, man. We got plenty more to talk about.